Greetings, it's Lee Desormo. Well, for this video, look at the title, Balance and Imbalance, and we're going to speak about order and chaos and the harmony needed to balance them out, basically. So when order and chaos are not, either of them in particular, in extremes, so order being too much in an extreme and chaos being too much in an extreme, then we'll have the balance. Whereas when one is being accentuated too much or exaggerated too much, then this is why we have imbalance. So that introduction apart, let us look into what I am talking about. Now, this is not a video about yin and yang exactly, but more along the lines of just what we said, the harmony of balancing out order and chaos and the necessities for both, and then the allowances for both. The proper balance of the universe is set up in that there is a stability, and that which is a perfection of like a core. So we can call this the core of God's self, or I amness. And then there's that which allows a counterpart or a counter kingdom, so as there is not only just perfection and just light, but there is operation and experiences other than that perfection itself. So we can say indeed that, if you want to use the word God, but God does not just want to stay as a singular entity, never having anything to do, no expressions of life, no individuated soul sparks doing anything or experience anything or having any free will. It would be pointless and stagnant if the universe was just perfect light and there was absolutely nothing to do. Similarly, and of course, if everything was darkness and chaos, there would be complete and limitless insanity, and just basically nothing would have anything to stand on in any shape, way, or form. No structure whatsoever, no words, no communication, no nothing. So just try to think about that for a minute and what I mean. You probably get a good idea of it. So we're keeping in mind, even though I use this picture, I am certainly not going to say that the female means negativity and the male is positive exactly. I'm not really looking to call it male or female whatsoever. That really is not exactly it. When we do those things, or like anthropomorphize or sort of essences or godly states or powers, principalities, and the like, and then put on sort of a human connotation to it. So simply meaning to say, though, in this case, the quote-unquote female energy meaning to do more with passive, but also more with a sense of, I don't want to say wild, but you'll see what I mean when I go through the presentation of what I'm talking about. And as for the male, it is about, well, it's not really about male at all, and it's not really necessarily about positive, but we're talking about the other end of the spectrum. So meaning to do with the sense of ordering and a sense of logic, whereas the female is more so-called, more in a sense of, not chaos, but more in a sense of looking to not be in order per se. Nonetheless, since, and the yin-yang is a very good symbol, since we see within the yin and yang the counter component, that which it chases, to call it that, so the yin follows yang and yang follows yin, this is to say that this symbol represents the idea of what the universe is, apart from what human beings may think or have within themselves of philosophy or intellectual capacity, but looking for spiritual stability. When basically, I'm trying to say a lot in a short video and a lot per slide, but when we are in a state of emotional calm, and when the mind possesses understanding due to the emotional calm, and vice versa, leading into each other, this is exactly what we're talking about. So it's not necessarily to be called yin-yang at all. It's just this was developed and understood by the ancient Chinese sages, but it also has been understood elsewhere in the world and has nothing to do with the religion or philosophy per se. And you'll see what I mean as we continue, perhaps. Let's get on. Again, we are already in a world of dualities, and we already can come to understand that when the world, or when the acting components thereof, are in harmony, then there is great unity. When they are not in harmony, that is where the chaos is. That is where the separation exists. So indeed, the God, the highest self-source, the I am self-source, The isness, the core of the isness, the is that is within all isness. This is the very heart and the very mind of what we can call God, which we are indeed all apart from. And indeed, in our very own highest sense and in our very own highest self, we are this entity. We are individuated soul expressions, and as it were, seeming to quote-unquote descend or branch out or be exhaled into a multitude of created worlds, thoughts, ideas, and are subject to and possess inherently and already all the modes of feeling and the access of thoughts and all potentials. So, since we are little mini versions of the great God, and each one of us certainly is a god or a goddess, but it's not about male or female, so let's just say a god in general to mean both, then we are trying to, when we are exhaled from God, we are trying to relearn and rebalance all that is within us and all that is around us, because the internal and the yin-yang symbol, just to call it that, also represents for a balance of internal as well as external. So there's a dance between the two. Here for this slide we have fire and water, but this is just meaning to represent of dualities. But when there is a harmony and an equality between them and an understanding of it, like when mind and heart are finally joined, when you have the so-called male and the so-called female principles combined, when you have light and dark combined and perfected. And I don't mean that evil is equal to good exactly, but you'll see what I mean perhaps. But rather, when there is the complete balance and the understanding of that which is and why it is allowed to be as it is, to be perfected self, and then to be allowed not to have to always be perfected self. This gives us experience, reappreciation, relearning, and the idea of the balance of the whole universe. Wherever we are in our thoughts and minds, we are on a particular mode of understanding, ever growing. So it is light that shines and light that reveals. We are in a world where, well, for all intents and purposes indeed, the sun is a prime source of light to show, as far as in the physical world, we basically cannot see something unless there's light shined upon it. So that which is in the darkness, not having light upon it, is what we call the unknown. And when we have the fear of the unknown, it is really, in essence, the fear of our very own self and our very own potentials. The denial of self and denial of our own potentials. So this sun, this picture here, also represents the inner light, which, when understood properly, is talking about the essence of being, the core self. We are, whether someone has come to the conclusion by making a self-discovery or not, but we all are indeed God branched out into smaller self. We are having an experience of exhalation. There are limits to this. There is ordered chaos, and this is what we're talking about. There are certain levels that if someone goes to too far of an extreme, they will go back to the other. We are trying to balance the pendulum. We are trying to find the inner center to match the outer, and when we do so, then we have an idea of the Buddha mind or the Christ consciousness. And this alone is what brings us back to God, not the idea of I am a thing and a thing alone and I am coming back into some sort of graduation, but rather it is all for the spirit. It is all talking of spirit to spirit, speaking to spirit. So the light is shining upon itself, speaking to itself, both internally and externally. Indeed, the light in the physical world of the sun shining on the earth. Yes, we have even taken so-called artificial light, but yet light is still light and one to itself. And so we are able to see, yes, in the dark, but in the dark with light, whether it be of the sun or be of a lamp or whatnot. We can even take a candle and spark it and ignite the flame. This is because light is one to itself. When we have the idea and the understanding that there is the microcosm and also the macrocosm of what is in us and without of us, and that which is common to all, even though we are certainly freely able to express our own ideas and in the style that we like. So my presentation may appeal to some, whereas it won't to others. But then the person that it did not appeal to, maybe I did not like their ideas. So the point is, we are either coming or going within source, within self, within the universe. And to take the time we need to have all the access and the schools and the planetary systems and the multiple lifetimes. Nobody is a body, nobody lives only once. Then we slowly come through the natural stages that are there, and there is nature to it, and created nature, and we are co-creator, and with light shined upon it, thus we see something as it is. But it is with the spiritual light that we see as to intention and purpose. Now, as the sun gives life to the planet, for as things to grow, the plants require the sunlight to grow, and certain animals need the plants, so on and so forth, up to the human level. The sun is the life giver and the sustainer, and that which is the visible expression of God. The sun is not God, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, it is a visible representation of that which gives life, and it is for the external as well as the internal. So someone that understands the inner sun and has this within themselves, and is not just in a state of in the early morning, and is not in a state of late night in a sunset, so to speak, but rather has the sun as a spiritual illumination within, has it at high noon or whatever stage you're at, then this is what is meaning to say that thine eye is full of light, therefore you are full of light. So it's sort of to paraphrase that, but it is a matter of having the inner illumination, and this is only bent upon it. This is construed upon the experience that we have within the outer world, leading and to the purpose for our inner life. Everything is for soul and spirit, for God's self to experience and express. So I just showed them sort of a morning picture, now sort of a sunset. When we sort of look at the grace of a sunset, meaning to say the soul level having done its journey and done its trip and ready for the next stage. So even as we have a child going to an adult, and we have a soul going through many lessons and becoming a wizened soul after many reincarnations, so we become aged and shine our light in a particular way. These things are natural outcomes, but each person may decide, indeed, of course, with the free will that you have, what you're going to do with your time in particular, and what you're doing has to do with what your mind understands and where your emotions, dealing with the spiritual, have to do with, and tying them together, mind and spirit, rather, to say what level a person, an individual, is at in their climb back to the source and to the understanding, or if they're what stage they are at in their continued desire to quote-unquote rebel from the source and not be that. When we understand that that is the very case for the souls that are here, coming or going, but all for the purpose, for the return and for the memory of enlightenment, then all the noise and all the trouble gets turned down. Things start to become more clear. We understand the person is at where they are at due to the level they are at from where they left source and where they desire to return. Now this picture is not necessarily meaning to say of a male or a masculine God. God is not male nor female. Female and male just used to represent principles. But what we have here is a created, like we just have been saying, a created world where there is the sun that is light for it, shining of it, but for the purpose of the sun's light, spirit in a spiritual sense, to grow within us. And as there is the physical world, there is the non-physical worlds, many dimensions thereof, leading back to high source self. And it is light which allows us to continue the growth back to the highest source. God in the highest sense can only be good and can only be light, and yet must allow for the counter kingdom to exist. The necessary adversary must exist, otherwise there would only be perfect self. So people need to understand this is how the universe operates. These are the key components. You have the light and the perfection of selfhood, which is the God I am source, and then you have that which is the counterpart, which allows for all of the lessons, the journeys we take, the experiences, the expressions, the creations, the ideas, all of that to be experienced, and for the purpose of growth, fun, enjoyment, as it is said in the Hindu schools, that the Paramatma, the super soul, which is the God self inside everybody, is the supreme enjoyer of all things, even the bad, because if there is eternity to experience and express, then indeed sometimes we want to take a trip into the negative so as to reappreciate what it was to be perfected self. Now that might sound tricky to some people, but when you meditate upon it, you might see that that is exactly the case and is a justice in and of its own self. But let us continue. We are indeed co-creators, since we are an aspect or an exhalation, a component, a part and parcel of the very divine I am self. We certainly are co-creator, and this earth is ours. We have been here on this school. Yes, it is a playground, and we have been getting our desires out, sharing our ideas. We have been doing the whole spectrum, the whole gamut of emotions and thoughts and possibilities. We've been fighting each other. We've been loving each other. We've been multiplying since the beginning of when this particular generation of Earth started. As it has been said from many ancients that this Earth is on its fourth or even fifth time around, meaning to say no life on it and then new life made upon it. Even in the Bible we have not nothingness, but rather the darkness stirred above the waters, so there was something already there. And when someone does a study into the deeper mysteries, they see that this planet has been doing its generations and its own reincarnations, so to speak, for a little bit of time indeed, this spanning many thousands of years as far as human linear thinking is able to comprehend. But all that aside, we are certainly co-creator, and since we are of God, sons and daughters of God, but are the Godhead itself being expressed in an individual sense, multiplied, then no wonder we are co-creator and manifesting and demanifesting, to use that word, our own very realities. Indeed, as below, so above, so we're looking at not just one planetary system, but rather many. It is sort of funny to think that only very recently people had the idea that, oh, maybe there's more than just one planet. Some people still, in this very age, past the year 2000, still have difficulty with understanding that there are more planets consisting with very much life. Well, this is based on sort of a misplaced ego and on a misconception of what the self is. The misidentification of the self is one of the biggest scourges for the truth to be withheld within oneself, to put it that way. So when we are able to go past the idea of I am a thing and rather see being and the multiplication of things and how the being is multiplied into many forms and modes of being, then we understand the how and the wherefore of many worlds. This earth is only one school, jail, hospital, etc. out of very many, and this is a low density vibration of a plane of existence. It's called a planet because it is a plan, and it is called a plane, planet in a plane, right? P-L-A-N-E and then T, a plane, T. And then a plan, E.T. The wholly extraterrestrial, that's another thing. But as my friend Drake always said, you can always look at how to discern the word. And indeed, when we understand we are just one planet out of many, even as we are one human out of many, as far as this planet was concerned, we see organisms within organisms and organization within a so-called chaos. Just another picture to show that. The more someone would look at or study these sort of pictures and to have an understanding, then pretend that any one of those stars is a sun or a planet that you are on. We can call it, whether for Gaia or Terra, this Earth or another one for that matter. But think of the idea of being an individuated soul expression, part of a greater package. And even though there seems chaos, there is certainly order to it as they blend into each other and correct and balance each other out, as it can only be. When we just do some contemplations on this, then we have a bigger understanding. This is not a mistake. This is meant to be just to look at the white screen and to have an understanding of, well, let's put it this way. Look at it for a second and see what does it say to you. The idea of, now I can only put the screen so much white. I can't really put the blinding effect that I would have preferred, but picture the brightest light you can possibly imagine and put it before you. Full illumination. What does it mean and how would you feel within that state? And now, look at the darkness. Think of the blackest black you can imagine, just to use these words. Then you can understand an absence of light and an unknowing or a non-ability to have an experience or an expression. Nonetheless, to be only in the brightest light of lights, or to be only in the darkest of darks, neither works. You need the other to have what is in between them, which would be everything, both manifested physically and more so spiritually, which having to do with purposes. Never mind the pyramid per se exactly, but for the fact of a light shining through it, creating the multitude of colors, but on a black background. So this picture ended up being perfect for my point, and to say that we have the light of lights, the core of light, meaning physically and spiritually, to use those words, and shining light through the darkness, and the darkness has grasped it not. So the darkness is not the purpose, and the light itself has no purpose unless it is expressed in a multitude of ways. And yet that which to be, that which calls all modes of creation back to itself and to recognize itself. So we are living in states of amnesia in order to remember and recognize who we are, where we came from. Anyone that says to you that you are nothing, you are not it, you're just a body, you're not God, you're nothing, you're in punishment, well, they're not exactly speaking the truth. They are speaking from their particular mode of amnesia. Someone that would say to anybody that, oh, you indeed are of the highest source self, that person is speaking in the mode of true enlightenment. This secret message, which is not a secret, has actually been revealed through every and all religions and spiritualities and philosophies, yet, of course, misconstrued or misinterpreted or taken out of context, or taken over by dark individuals who, with their own level of amnesia, are wanting to be addicted to the control of material nature, then want to make the message bad for everybody. So, like Christ was saying to the Pharisees, for example, that you yourselves do not enter, nor do you allow anyone else to enter. It is similar with many religions. Look at the Catholic Church, for example. The hierarchy thereof, so-called, do not understand true enlightenment, and then they also try and keep others down because they themselves do not get it. The person operating in the mode of light and enlightenment is there to help everybody, if they can, if and when they can, where they can, to say, I want to help you, help yourself. We are one, we are the same. And again, to show the rainbow is a secret message, and people say, oh, it was God's message to show that he would never send a flood again. Well, that's part of it, but it also has to do with chakra symbols and energy levels that are within us as well as without. So I just wanted to show that picture as being light shining down on creation in a multitude of ways, physical and other. And again, to show another picture of it in a similar sense. The varying levels, using a darker color to represent what is on the bottom in this case, and then the lighter color, like a rainbow upside down, and a lighter color to show, or rather, meaning to say the lightest vibration, the highest of the chakra senses, meaning to be indicated in the color of violet or purple, however we like to call it, to show the difference of the, how do we word it? The ways of which the balance is within the color itself. So if we think of purple as being red and blue mixed together and blended, then we have a very good idea. But you needed yellow, which was a step from light itself, to be the blending, and that's why yellow, in maybe the utmost sense, or yellowish orange, would be the middle of the rainbow. Do some study on that and see for yourself if that makes sense. Maybe I'm wording it in a certain way, but we all have our language styles and prefaces, but nonetheless, this is what I'm trying to say of the way of balancing. Where is the harmony in the middle? It is to find the balance of order and chaos. Now the Tree of Life. In here, for this picture, I liked it, and I hope there's no problem in using it. We have the 4 seasons. The 4 seasons also represent, of course, the soul itself. Who and what we are. The levels that we are going through. Being straight, even looking at it from a way of one particular human life body. You have a human child, and being in spring and growing. Then you have the summer, being the strength and the prime, in your strong prime adulthood, and then the fall, and then of course the winter. And yet belonging to the tree, and the tree representing the soul, then there is a repetition. There is again spring, summer, fall, winter. So it's the reincarnation process. But it's not just for the soul experiencing it here, but these processes are also in a more of a macrocosmic way, depicting planets, planetary systems themselves. So it is like a spiraling out, and we are all on one particular level of our amazing journey within ordered chaos to find and remember and restore our own divinity and identity as I am. Each one of us, it's not to say that when we are out of source we are equal to source, but only when we are back inside do we have our kinship and fellowship and oneship with it. So in the Christ consciousness, or in the Buddha mind, or however we would like to say it, it is here where we say love neighbor as self, because neighbor is self. When that is understood, then that is the key of victory on any planet in any dimension, where the unity is by far stronger than any chaos that was set against it. Now indeed, the Tree of Life And the Kabbalah here is quite an interesting system of understanding, one such style to do it. The tree of life representing indeed the inner nature. So when we are able to understand that within us is the whole oak within the seed, to put it that way, right? You have a seed of a fruit, or the acorn in which the tree resides. So you have within itself already all the potential of what it was meant to be. So when we understand our inner nature and the growth level, and compare ourselves for a moment like a tree, if we use that analogy or metaphor, then we understand that we are having within us that which is already there, an ordered chaos, and leading to the highest enlightenment of the highest order, meaning not just pure light and that's it, nowhere else to go, but once there, the understanding to have the allowance for all that is. That itself is the only thing which can be Judge of judges, King of kings, Queen of queens, is the understanding of the balance of all that is, not constantly in a mode of an extreme. I recommend the study of the Kabbalah to anyone if they're interested. The esoteric is indeed very important to get into the deeper mysteries of isness. So there you have it, one such method. Again, quickly, I use this wonderful painting by the mystical painter Alex Gray. This is to simply show that we have creation and the harmony thereof, and then when humans enter the picture with imbalances, varying and differing modes of imbalance within us, then this is causing the destruction. When we have greeds and lusts and different things and competitions and jealousies and fearful modes of, oh, I better get a good life for my physical body, and when we're in these varying modes of fearful competition and fearful preservation of small selfish self and not big united self, then this is what causes the destruction. This is what causes the consumption of an earth school. So had we all been having the idea of unity, and that we are one, and that we are co-creators indeed, and we're not necessarily to be under the yoke of any god that is not a god, or any under the power of any demon that is on a mode of chaos and is controlling the modes of chaos and counter kingdom, then we find that we could be in a very good utopia as it is. But we are here on this earth to experience and to see and witness the extremes of all things, and it is by having the idea of harmony and balance that we find our highest self, and not before it. So I don't got to tell anyone about things of pollution and destruction and things that are done with disrespect and disregard, and what are the effects, but it's also to look at the causes. The causes of problems have to do with imbalanced soul. As the person is inside, so they will do without, obviously. So this is what we're talking about. When we are in balance, when we're in balance in respect of nature, then we're able to understand how it works. Like if human beings were not on this planet, and indeed before human beings were on this planet, the whole thing was set up from demigods, and in cases we can even say ETs, for lack of a better word, because there are different levels of gods and hierarchies that are there, and we too are it, we're not separate from them. And to say the earth itself was set up, and in and of itself it had a perfect cycle. It would have continued and regenerated as it was perfectly, probably for an extremely long time, if not forever, as long as the components and mechanisms that allowed it to be nature would have been unobstructed or non-polluted. With the intentional introduction of humans, then it was the understanding that the human being, because of the access of intellect and the access of emotional spectrums that are weighed and carried out by different levels of understanding, for the good and for the bad, then of course we were meant, in a way of speaking, to consume this place for our own learning, and to see indeed the horrors of what happens when we are not in unity, and then the beauties of what happens when we are in cooperation. Nature itself can be brutal. Yes, you have carnivores and herbivores and animals fighting each other and all sorts of strange things. That is to show itself that in order for the earth to have its perfect balance, there must be ordered chaos, to put it that way. And that is exactly what nature is, if you look at it in a very pure sort of way. When people all over the world were in touch with nature and harmony, they themselves, when they understood balance, not the chaos and the wild desire thereof, not to be an animal, so to speak, but to be in a way of respect and going with nature and adapting with the seasons and having to do migrations and lifestyles and necessities, and human beings had the idea of nature. It is only when, and in and of itself, though, that itself is not complete, because that was not to be the final stage, because this planet was not meant to be inhabited as a school system forever in just that mode, because there are other things to do. So we have those who are bent on sort of a destruction mode, and those who are bent on sort of a more of an idea of balance mode. And this has been what has been putting the planet into the state that where it is, but it is indeed for a purpose. People get what they desire, and they go where they are going by their own volition. Now, we had civilizations on this planet which were very much in tune with the spiritual nature. And indeed, for this picture, Egypt being one of them. It was said that in its prime and glory, Egypt was one of the most, if not the most happiest places one could have possibly been on the planet. Other civilizations had their glory, and there was the rise and the fall. When there was a rise, it was for the idea of unity. When there was a success of a country or a city, it was because the idea of unity and being very humanitarian, being very spiritual. And this led to the increase and the work for the greater and the common good of all involved. Not just the few and not just the many, all involved, including all and everything. Nature and human, of course. So when this was understood, a successful civilization came about. And there was great happiness, there was some structure, but we can understand that when things were unappreciated, and even when things were in a good set of balance or a good set of order, when it got to the point where someone with chaos would take over a position who was supposed to balance out the order to chaos and have the order and the purposes of life, then of course there was always a downfall, which we can understand as any civilization has gone through. Look at the short period. Now, Egypt was said to have lasted in a very good condition for a very long time, even for thousands of years. Then we can look at something that happened. Look at the Western Hemisphere. When we look at America, for example, it is a young country, and look how strange it is that in such a short time it seems to have been in such a great turmoil already. Built upon chaos, order coming out of it, but then again, now indeed the stages are again chaotic, trying to look for a balance. If order is too strong or if chaos is too strong, this creates great unhappiness for people until the outcome is there for the unity of all. When the purpose of unity of all and the happiness of all is implemented, we are very much in a great state, and not before it. So we're trying to learn chaos and order and the balancing of them. Now, Atlantis was also said to be a wonderful place before its own downfall. Now, this planet, this picture itself does not necessitate that Atlantis looked exactly like this. This is just something I found. The artist, Nickel, is indeed very gifted. Hope no problem with using the picture, just to make a depiction of what things could have been like. Atlantis, indeed, is underwater now, and it was pretty much spread across a great portion of the globe and not just limited to one small tiny place. If anyone does research, they can look into that and see that's the case. We can see to this very day that there is a sunken civilization underwater to the day. It's been found off the coast of Japan, it's been found off the coast of Portugal, it's been found off the coast of Brazil and south of Cuba, etc. underwater. It's all there. When we look at that, we understand. Now, that place was, the earth has ever been remade or fixed with either water or fire, as the old mystics say in the old stories and traditions are handed down. So Atlantis was buried underwater, and then the descendants of them went to Egypt and other places. That's something we can look into. The point being, once again, when Atlantis was in its prime, it was in a very happy state. The people were very happy before the downfall came, when too much chaos got in. We look at a modern city, we look at back in those things and say, oh, that's done, I'm safe, I'm aloof. And yet, no, many of us were in those times and lived it, and now we are in modern cities right now, varying levels of order and chaos within them, varying levels of balance and imbalance, having to do with what is inside of us, spiritual modes of existence and intellectual understandings. And we even, like, look, for example, picture all the many people that would be within this scene right here, within buildings and on the streets and whatnot. I just chose the water because I like the reflection aspect. But just to say, imagine all the people, and even though all the people could think, oh, we're so different, you're not me, I'm not you, and this and that, yet here they are functioning in one place, to call it that, in one city, living and dying together, basically. So in a given geographic or demographic, we understand that this is the case worldwide. So there is indeed order in the chaos, or in a unity, and then of course in places a disunity, to say it that way. Where are our cities going to go? Are they going to get better? Are they going to improve? It depends upon the people. If people are going to put their principles higher, or people are going to start looking at the higher self and spiritual values, then of course we're going to see ourselves as much more worthy than mere things. We are not things, nor are we playthings. When our emphasis is going on, oh, I can buy that and I can obtain that, then we are ignoring self. No wonder people feel stressed and miserable, depressed, or they are lost in an illusion. Because when someone is spiritually bereft, then they begin to take pleasures in five senses, because they don't have any inner joy. So a sign of a place that becomes too decadent and too ignorant of spiritual values indeed self-destructs. So it is for each of us to be the salt of the earth and to have our spiritual light, and to put things towards the good and towards the harmony, rather than the chaos and the unharmony. The unharmony, the imbalance, which is destroying us in places, or we are seeing the outcomes of extremes when there is not enough understanding within individuals. Now, it's not to harp on any one country, or there are natural disasters and other disasters and many bad things that happen. Pollution in general, when we have a disregard, when we don't care, when we shrug it off and say, I don't want to be responsible, basically we're shoving garbage down our own children's throats if we're not thinking about it. I mean, look at what we are doing on this planet. If we're not being intelligent about what's going on, we're going to cause all sorts of problems for people down the road. And people down the road, well, guess what? That's us too. The reincarnation level is very real. It's a very actuality. So when someone says, oh, it doesn't matter, I won't be there, well, what a disgusting, despicable state of mind you're in, because your soul is empty to say such a thing like that. And I've heard people say things like that. That's ridiculous. When we look at pollution on land, on water, this is a consumption of things and not a respect of the order of things, not a respect of nature. Had we respected nature and would have a better idea, then we would more quickly change our ways and not just run to garbage and simple recycling, but have a much better change of style. The destruction of the planet is doing much having to do with greed and consumption, consumerism, spreading a very vile plague throughout the globe. We are going to see, and it will get worse perhaps before it gets better, the fruits of what this is about. Another simple picture of pollution in general: industry, money-making, business, and disregard for what effects it may have. Because just because in the moment I am happy, I am rich, means very little in the grand spectrum. What you reap, you sow. And again, just to show another similar thing in nighttime. So, we can think of the whole globe, all the lifetimes we've had, the experiences we are having now, what it's all been for. It's nice to see a picture like this because it seems candy-coated and it's cute with children and a clean planet. But when we examine it, we see that there is, well, like we've been saying, the extremes of both. We see an imbalance in places and a balance in places. Order in some places and too much order in some places. Chaos in places that were necessitated, and then too much chaos in other places that led to a lot of destruction and disregard. It's very important for us to realize this is our world, this is our experience. What are we to be proud of and what are we to be disgusted at within our own selves? Nice to blame another, but what are we doing to make it a better place or not? Are we being inactive, or are we being active? This is a question that each person can ask themselves. I'm not trying to put necessarily Christian connotations, although I have no problem with Jesus at all, and as far as Christ consciousness was concerned, for all and intended to all, but nonetheless having to do with the struggle of what we can say good versus evil, but also having to do with knowledge versus ignorance, balance versus imbalance, order versus chaos. All these things that are there. Within a person that becomes balanced, there is a natural default. Natural wisdom and natural balance deal with natural maturity that ends up happening, and an understanding and a sort of a realism, or rather a realistic appreciation and a self-assessment. Whereas a disregard to it, or the state of unbalanced emotions dealing with a lack of understanding, deals with destruction. So within us, it's not about saying, oh, it's an outside fight, God and the devil. Well, God and the devil is us. This fight is inside of each and every single one of us. If we can find light and balance, then we can succeed and grow and mature. And then if we stay on a side of ignorance and emotional imbalance and trying to ride out the wave of our emotions, and even at the cost of others, well, this is the destruction aspect. Indeed, and we go about, all of us, not a single one of us sees all things and knows all things in the mode that we are currently in. Our highest self may indeed know all things, but right now we are in an amnesiac factor. So we have a trust towards things we don't yet see and hope for, and a trust or a desire to look towards things that are not so good. And is it night and day? Well, these things are within all of us. The mirror that is being shown in this wonderful painting is to show that it is all of us. The earth is showing a mirror of what we are. The exterior is mirroring the interior, and the interior is being expressed on the exterior. So we understand this there's a very real activity going on within and without, and we are trying to find what is the self and what is being caused. Once we have gone through this planetary school, some of us graduate and some won't, and those who don't will just maybe have to repeat some certain lessons and such, or just be thrown back into the source to start again, whatever the case may be. But we shall all see after this thing is done who stood where and who found the balance and who did not. Indeed, just this picture just simply to show that within all of us are the potentials of all things. Here simply the blue eye to show the good and the justice and whatnot, and the red to show the evil and the lack thereof, the lack of compassion and etc. So within all of us this war is taking place. We understand that it is a common thing to all people and have nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with thought, nothing to do with levels of science and so-called science and pseudo things, but rather very real things, looking at the isness, looking at the very actual isness. As we see the world is without, we see that that's the case for what has been inside of us up until now and beyond. Just another picture to show a state of harmony and then a state of destruction. Let it speak for itself. So indeed, who is at stake? Well, the very soul itself. We are in the middle of a struggle. You have what is called good and evil, right and wrong. You have harm and non-harm. You have various modes of actions and reactions, causes and effects. And the person is to decide. It's not for someone to give a blame necessarily. This world is constructed. Anyone who has true inner light and understands why the world was made will say that it is a school for souls to learn balance. Even all the bad things that happened here to each and all of us were somehow necessary. And in our state where we are not in a body, but we are in a higher spiritual form, which is our real self in a higher state of being, then we are aloof and perfectly safe from all things. Each and every single one of us chose to leave source when we did, to undergo the journey of learning and relearning. So since this was an individually accepted choice, and since even what seems very ugly is a temporary thing, a temporary condition, then we can understand when compared to eternity, it's really not that much. But indeed, we are very wary to understand of who is trying to take advantage of what situation. The person that is naturally matured is the person that has natural balance within, and by default does not look to harm another, but because they find their own unity with the God source self, then they say, ah, because I am that, yet so too are you. Whereas somebody in a mode of chaos who is trying to rebel and in every which way be the counter kingdom and say, I am not that, then of course by default they would say to the other person, you are not that, and this is the cause of conflict. So we are like fallen angels, for lack of a better word, and to say we are looking for our own selves. We are looking at things, but doing so in an ignorant state. Rather, we are looking for at our own selves, what we are. Looking at reflections upon reflections. You have here light and dark and in the water. You have mirrors of mirrors within mirrors, and really it is just pointing back to our own very self. When we are able to do this, that is the beginning of the journey. When we say, okay, finally I've had enough, what am I doing here? This is the start of sanity and the return to the kingdom. So the so-called 7 deadly sins, add or take away as we are, but lending into each other, and these are all available within all of us, having to do with what is an unbalanced and a misunderstood or a not as of yet well understood thing that is happening to the mode of being. So we are all guilty at one point or another of all and any of these, and there can be more or blend them as we will, but they also have their opposites. So the person that is very strong and waxing strong in any one of these or blending of these is someone that has an emotional unbalance and a lack of understanding. It is an ignorance, and it is a non-understanding of what I am. When a person is not understanding I am self-source, they are in a mode of conflict, and it is conflict within that leads to, for time and times and whatever times, self-destruction and destruction to others. When we say, when we finally come to that moment of clarity where we say, I am it, and so too is my brother and my sister, then these things start to flee out the window. We rise above the old self and become reborn. So there are polarities and dualities and balancing of counter levels, but they do not go out of whack. Rather, they are in perfect harmony within themselves. Rather, to say the chaos that goes out has to do with finding the order that is to be found within. So just take, for example, I like this picture. Take, for example, of the white line to mean order, and waving not in a straight linear line, but sort of like in a spiral state, right? And in a whirling curving going upwards. And then you have the red doing the same thing, but it is doing a perfect counterpart to the white. So they necessitate and they are required to each other, towards each other, to have fulfillment, towards the leading back to enlightenment. In Hinduism, it was described very well. You have the God that holds all things, or the Father Spirit, just call it Father, it doesn't matter, Mother, Father, Isness, to allow of all things to take place within a certain school. Then you have a Vishnu for a certain preserver aspect, and then you have Shiva for a certain destruction aspect. But it is for the growth itself. When someone looks into the depth of whether it's Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever the case may be, the real spiritual light that is being taught within it, then by default we find that these principles are naturally operating already, not dependent upon our belief, but are just, well, isnesses within the great isness itself. So when this is understood and the reasons thereof, then we can start to have an appreciation for why the world is as it is and where it is going to. And the outcome of this world is very predictable. That's why prophecies can be very well said and have been by those who saw, because it is, even as it is potentials within one, so it is within another. And this sort of school of earth is not the first time that this sort of thing has happened. So I'm just going to use the picture and use my own description in this manner for the purpose to say we are fighting our own self. The devil that we fight is the devil inside of us that we are trying to conquer. So whether we even did it on the outside, external world or not, it was for finding a victory within. All fights that are on the outside have only to do with what is a conflict and a misunderstanding and imbalance of what is inside. As we keep saying, this is a natural reality. Indeed, an age of Kali representing the demon or demoness that is a destroyer and is representing of ignorance and imbalance that is causing a lot of destruction and chaos. When we are actively seeking for light and balance, we get it by default. We find the secrets, there are paths laid out, we end up getting them, we find our destiny, we find our purpose, we remember I am source self. When we are in another mode and we're finding the chaos, this is because the person is in the highest level of ignorance, not wanting to unite with highest self, but trying very hard to be the opposite of that. Trying, as it were, in my own wording for the moment, trying too hard to be the rebel and not having an understanding of the balance that is. And there is, by default, only so far you can go until you hit a rock bottom and then start to question yourself. This is a natural outcome. Now we have greed, like we're looking at this, the 7 deadly sins, for example. We have greed as a strong power. We have those who are in great fear and terror, who seek to have possession and powers on a physical plane of existence for not having a very strong spiritual life or existence. So one of the very furthest places one can go, or one of the very furthest rebellions one can go from their own self, and causing harm to their own self, is to say I am nothing and I am just body and the earth and the five senses and the gratifications is the best thing in sliced bread. When we are of that modality, we are in a high mode of ignorance, and therefore no wonder destruction, because ignorance and imbalance brings destruction, that is the fruit thereof. As they say, the wages of sin is death, but death means many things, not just a physical death, but a death of spirit. When we start to look for life and what light and life and love are about, and causing foundations of core of one's own self, then we rise above these lesser modalities of misconceptions dealing with ignorance based on imbalance emotions, spiritual misunderstanding, and misidentification. I thought that one was funny. Greed. He who dies with the most toys still dies. Well, reincarnation may be true. It is indeed true. But the point for this picture is to say nobody is really going to be keeping anything in a material sense. That is very obvious. Oh, you may be reborn into another rich family or something like that, but the point is that cycle itself is not unending and is not an eternal mode of existence. It is a vanity and dead within itself. It is a death of soul. So why we have people that seem to have a lot of something, it's not to be jealous of them or even to be too upset, but rather to maybe have a pity and say, oh well, unfortunately you are very lost, but now you're also, since you are causing harm to others, you need to be put in check. And it is with our unity with each other that we stand up against this and simply say, in a passive, even a passive, peaceful way, no, we're not putting up with it. Everyone dies, everyone has died to a different level spiritually, and of course we are undergoing life and rebirth and death and re-death in this physical world. This picture is simply to represent the various forms of lust, not just sexual, but other things. Lust and desire based upon sudden need or as if you cannot live without it, and causing destruction to one's own self. Because then we're getting lost in objects and subjects, but not with higher levels of isness and being. When the being is pure and clean, then there is joy and greatness. But when we are lost in lust, we are indeed blind and trapped within our own actions, because we ourselves have caused it. But the good news is we ourselves can get out of anything that we find ourselves within. Now, the opposite, you see someone that has an idea of control and the destruction and harm to others, and the raising of small self at the cost of others, so these atrocities to soul, then they are in a bad mode, no doubt, and in a state of ignorance indeed. When you have someone that's finding the light and having appreciation of the balance of nature, both outer and inner, then you have automatic joy. There's no such thing as someone who climbs the true spiritual ladder of maturation who is not in joy. It becomes a natural default, because the understanding becomes strong and cleansed and pure by the soul's appreciation of balance, of all emotional things. Now, when we have our maturity into love, love can only be there by understanding, and by a desire of unity and bringing together and back to oneness with our very highest self, which is no thing we can think of, no object whatsoever. Joy is there for all people, but it cannot be had, or it is, let me reword it. Joy is in its perfect state when it is purely spiritual and based upon mutual, let me rather put it that way, mutual enjoyment of unity. So when we are not greedy, when we are spiritually full, we naturally give out. We give not just a matter of things. Someone could be extremely poor and have nothing. We give of ourselves, excuse me, when we feel full and strong and not before. Only when we are feeling full and strong within and balanced, then it is very easy feeling the vibration of love, which is the strongest power in the cosmos. Love is what fulfills us and allows us to share with others by default. You too are me, I am you. It's all the same thing in unison. This is the tie that binds. Love itself, and giving us the ability and the desire, the requirement, leading to a desire and a want, and even a need to give back out, because we feel so much stability and comfort inside of ourselves. Now, nothing to say about, we're talking about lust a few minutes earlier. Well, nothing to say of the idea of procreation, creation aspects. When there is a loving unity, when there is a community, when there is a communal state, when we have, and here just for this picture, we have male and female having a co-creation and creating a baby, that is an amazing thing. I mean, we are indeed co-creators. So when we have this idea, not just to say of in a male and female sense, but in the general sense of it, when we are working in unison for a greater good, for a purpose, a mutual purpose, and when tied by unity, then the outcome of it is obviously going to be a very beautiful thing. Harmony of light, harmony of sound, the balance of many things, creating a masterful piece of enjoyment, no matter what it may be. To be the supreme enjoyer and to enjoy what we are doing with and as a supreme enjoyer. It takes time for us to find the harmony within. Anyone who is teaching religion or science or whatever the case, and is not doing it happily and doing it in a state of being morose or a grudge or feeling it's a duty and not a joy, is still not having the balance within self, is still trying to sort out order and chaos, and is still exaggerating one or the other too much. When we are finding the balance, that is when a natural happiness comes forth. We have to, within that though, we have to be ourself and our true self in order to find this balance. We all have to act out many extremes and many modes of being, interacting with all these things in order to find our true self, and not before. So no one can say to another, you must do this and have to do that. Whether they can give recommendations or even explain isness, but the person needs to see it for their own self, to appreciate it. And that is the only way that it can be, and the only way that it would be considered fair and just. When we have chaos, we have a natural destruction. We're taking things of order and putting it into a nonsensical reality. But even within that chaos, there's only so far it can go. It can't be a non-entity or a non-existence. People could speak of a black hole or the counter kingdom being complete absence. Well, what does that mean? There's not such a thing as being itself, a sole entity having a mode of being nothing. But rather, when we are away and not being perfected self, then we are what? We are being the chaos itself. Not nothing, but in a state of chaos. And that is something to really for us to appreciate, to understand how this universe works. The counterpart itself is trying to do everything it can to not be that, which is perfect itself. Now here I want to say something. It's not about harping on a religion or trying to share any views, but rather just to give examples in history. When, for example, Christianity first started and was getting a little fame, a little notoriety, then there were those who were of a certain paradigm, certain structure system who are not used to it in the teachings. But this is not just about Christianity. It could be Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever the case, Islam, whatever the case, anything you could think of. When a change comes about, there is always chaos first before another set of order comes in. So when there was a lot of imbalance within certain leaders, you have emperors, right? You have Caesar going, and then as the Caesars got worse, you end up having leaders like Nero and Caligula, who were very imbalanced individuals. When you give too much power to a very imbalanced individual, no doubt there is violence and destruction. So that is to say, when this new ideas happen, when higher things happen, when someone speaks of unity and higher things, when it challenges the old paradigm, when it challenges the person, then of course it can react violently due to their imbalance. And indeed, with using that example we just showed, early Christians being persecuted, well, look what happened. When they themselves, when you had many churches came out, and churches were formed by men on their own, men and women, well, women too for that matter, but it became in many cases patriarchal. Well then look, when they exaggerated and took over too much power and wanted to put too much order, they themselves destroyed and did to others that which first would have happened to them. I'm speaking of it as if in a singular body. So when you have that which was destroyed now being the destroyer, this is based upon what? See, these are patterns of existence that are there, and that they are very dangerous. When something loses its original sense of balance and unity, it becomes a destructive force. So we see even with this example of how what once was the innocent victim now became victimizer. And this is within all of us, this has happened to all of us throughout our soul journey, our sojourn here, our journey, and has been for all of us to reappreciate. Now, I didn't want to make the presentation too long and show so many pictures, but again, all cultures, when they went awry and when chaos ended up being, or overabundance of chaos or an overabundance of order came into play, then there was destructive natures. It is the balance of order and chaos, the harmony that is within the heart and the mind, that make a very wonderful balance, because everything is based upon unity and the growth and the greater good of all. Good and evil work for the greater good by default. Not a lot of people understand that. But when there is an exaggeration, when the chaos becomes too much order, or the order becomes too much chaos, or the order is too much order, chaos is too much chaos, then we have destruction and violence. And even a great kingdom or civilization comes to ruin based on imbalance and a losing and a non-preservation of that which it held as balanced and sacred. And here's the fall of Rome. Here's a wonderful painting. We think of that which was a mighty empire and a great civilization and a conqueror of the known world. Well, for them in those times, the known world. Not obviously, there you have Chinese and Africans and others. Well, lower South Africa, I mean. Not that it was not unknown, and then of course Western Hemisphere. But I'm overdoing it, putting in too much semantics. But the point is, even something great can have its fall. How long did it take for Rome to become great and fall? What did it take for Egypt to become great and then to fall, or the Mayan civilization, or even in the Far East of Asia, the rising and the falls of nations, and the rising and falls of empires? When did things turn into a democracy? Well, when did democracy fail? Look at the current world, trying to be a global democracy, but then it's also now a threat and a fear of global tyranny. These are all because of the modes that are within us. It's all very interesting to note the cyclic patterns that continue. Now you have America, you have the corporations running the show. Those who have money and influence, and doing it for what purposes? Well, all for the greater thing of showing too much order and too much chaos, showing that there is imbalance before there is balance. So it's not to pick on any particular symbol you see here or anything like that, but it's just to say the idea of when you have an imbalance trying to run a balance, then of course it ends up being in all sorts of manners of stress and depression and trials. And even while though all those are going on, there are still many joys to be had. So we are still within anything, still able to keep levels of our peace. But right now on the earth, of course, we are feeling a very big tension. We are feeling something pulling. We are feeling something calling. We're trying to remember our higher self and our true purposes. We're trying to have an understanding of what indeed is order and chaos, what indeed is good and evil, and what are the outcomes that are happening. And if there are similar patterns, then of course, if these are known outcomes, and we are not alone in the universe, and not everything is taking place just here, then we have friends in high places too, and that is a very good thing to be aware of. Now, as for this picture, I wanted to show something. I like a little fantasy here and there, and I'm not really too much into any hobby per se, but some people might recognize this right off the bat. But here is something I wanted to talk about. I had read this while briefly looking through different fantasy things and games and whatnot. Well, in the war, some people have heard of Warhammer. This is a Warhammer 40k. I don't play the game. I don't own any of the miniatures of 40k, but I just read something that I found interesting, and it was called the Horus Heresy. Well, just to say this is, fiction depicts reality and vice versa. And the two are, you can't have fiction without there being reality, even as you can't have a lie without there being a truth to it first. Well, here we have a representation of our own very reality in a fictional way. The gentleman on the right is depicting the emperor, right? You have the so-called god king, or the Caesar, whatever you want to call it. And this civilization was about complete and total control. And it sort of represents when the Catholic Church, for example, was out of control, had too much power, was drunk on power, unable to cause too much fear. When the order became micromanaging and became terrible. It's like again, it is indeed a yin-yang principle. When we have those who say, like, for example, in the Garden of Eden, when we said, oh, it's the devil that tricked the human beings into doing this and that. Well, the Garden of Eden story is much deeper than just something to be taken literal. The fact of the matter is, when we have something which was claiming freedom, right, away from too much order, right? You had too much order saying, don't do this, don't touch the fruit, don't you dare, or else this and that. and then you had one saying, oh no, it's okay, this and that. So you already have there within itself the idea and the reality of order and chaos and balance and imbalance. So you had the fallen gentleman on the fallen on the left, down, lying down, defeated, was representing Horus, which was to say, you, the emperor, I have a vision and prophecy that you are becoming a micromanager and a tyrant, over ordering everything and having no allowance for everything. Everything is too structured. So therefore, I'm going to join chaos and fight you. And now, even though it was said that Horus was defeated, it was still an ongoing game or an ongoing business in the fictional world of Warhammer. Now, even though it sounds cute or fantastical to talk about a fantasy story or something made up, but it is not fiction. This is real life. We are looking at levels of when order is too strong and too much and out of control and turns into a monster. And then you have, of course, when chaos is too out of control and is too much of a monster and causes either the extreme of either one of them causes stress and trouble for us. So we have to find the balance. And the balance is understood when we understand within ourselves and know it and own it that our highest self is I am God's source. And when we are extended and expressed away from it by our own choice, being individuated, when we do leave, then we know that we will undergo all the modes of chaos. This is an eternal dance that we are having. Think about when order is too controlled. You have Nazism, to call it that, right? You have a fascist level. This is not just to say for blame these people. It's nothing to do with Germans. It has to do with the fact of anywhere in the world when there was too much order and control unto others, there was a great terror, and of course there was some to stand up against it by natural default. Now, of course, those who were behind the whole so-called Nazi regime were very much into mysteries and esoteric symbols and whatnot. You have the eagle and the swastika. The swastika is representing the sun. It's a sun symbol that you find in Buddhism and Hinduism. So there is, of course, the understanding of the powers of order. Red is often used for a color of victory. Often it's the red colored team that wins. Think about that for a minute. You'll see that it is actually true. So those who understand deep mysteries may use them either for order or for chaos. But interestingly enough, the world is going the way that it must and in the direction that it must, for all to see and for all to experience all things, to surely know the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, the imbalance in one way causing harm, and then the balance of things and the proper cooperation of how things must work. This itself is being itself the good and having the enlightenment. This picture just to represent chaos. What a tangled web we all weave and just do it to ourselves and to others. But when we are looking past the mess of it and we're able to look at one thing, so even in the chaos here, so-called, of these roots and these stretching vines, we understand that while in a jumble it looks messy, yet if you take any one of them and lead it back to the source, it is in a sense of oneness. So even chaos belongs to oneness. Some people don't understand that, but that is very true. Even all things are God. There is one God and we are all it. God is everything. Not a lot of people understand that. They're too busy trying to prove individuality or individuate itself. But when you look at the little chaotic component and bring it back to the source of isness, you will see that it is indeed one. So understanding how this operates, then we can look at the big picture and know that it is how it is, and someone is coming or else going. Indeed, coming or going to God's source. And this planet is just one place. This planet and living here is not the be-all and end-all of all things. This is one such school. We have been living and reincarnating on this planet for a very long time. This is just one planet. There are other things to do. And it's not just reduced to, oh, after this physical world, that's the end of physicality. It's just spirit. No. There is such a thing as space travel and having the abilities to be physical angels, to call it that. There are lots of things to be had. But indeed, we are not forced into anything. Rather, even when we die, there is an automatic reacquaintance with highest self, God's source, I am isness, and there we are totally safe and secure. And yet, nonetheless, we are under the laws of influence of what we have done and what we have desired. So we are, when we take a breath out and we go out from source, we understand, okay, I'm going to be subject to all and many modes of varieties and things to experience. And in this case, since we already chose it, not to say it is predestined, but in and of itself, the acorn possesses the tree, we understand. When we have this understanding, we understand that everything is okay no matter how it seems to be. So I just like this picture to show the tree of life and the outstretching and the roots in the multiverse universe. Well, as in nature, so in other levels, meaning to say of the earth, we have, well, out in space. We have the tree and its roots, but it's leading back to the great source. Whether we have this planet to look at or other planets and systems, still there is unity and there is oneness. And to really look at that, and to not be desirous to prove individuality, then we can understand that the great root and the great source of all things and the very tree of life itself is one shiny core essence. And indeed, this makes us look in wonder like a child and have appreciation for what is. When we can look into the night sky or the day sunset or anything for that matter, appreciate nature, look at something not with disregard and overconfidence or a lack of wonder and awe. If we look at or study anything for a long time, even just a blade of grass or a piece of cloth or whatever, and really understood that it is held together by what we can call God's energy, and it is in existence and manifested, whether directly by creator or co-creators, we understand somewhere in it, it has its root in source and isness. And it should keep us in a state of being in awe and wonder and in marvel. And this means our heart is open and our minds have an appreciation for what is, rather than not having an appreciation for what is. People that are very spoiled and have too many things and can please their five senses all the livelong day often don't have an appreciation for things, and they keep repeating those things in the addictions and cycles because they have forgotten the self. There is no true joy unless there is mastery within the heart and within the soul by choice, meaning the recognition of what you and I are. I rather would just let this picture speak for itself for a few moments. You can pause any of these pictures too and just look at them. I just took this collection, but for a few minutes or so, just look at this and see what you have to think. Pause it if you want to look at it longer, but see what it says to you. We have walked through the chaos, we have walked through the exaggerations of order and non-order, and now, more than ever before, for those who look, can start to see and reappreciate all manner of things and as to what purpose is and has been for. We are on this great, eternal, universal, ever-ongoing dance and journeys. That which is created comes from Creator and has its oneness with Creator already. We are one, we are all expressions of everything. We have all experienced or can experience absolutely everything, from the worst of the worst to the best of the best. And as if building a tree, going through our struggles and our ignorances, becoming more and more balanced for those of us who did it and want to, going into higher levels and kingdoms and domains that are already there. So those who don't want to, who are not ready to rejoin a higher level or a better mode of self, because heaven is within us, and when it is within us, then it can be without. So we can think of a better world and a better planet, and it is such because the level of beings who would inhabit that area, just to put it in that simple term, have it as such because they are as such. So there are many modes and dimensions for us to get to, and it is about all this whole purpose of school of this earth has been about to learn about balance of order and chaos. It's not to say good and evil are equal, but rather good and evil serve the greater good. When someone understands that that's the key of things, then they can be very satisfied actually. That ordered chaos is it. Someone can go and live their life and find out for themselves, and we all have, and we will continue to. And come in the end to know, no matter how far we went away, eventually everyone says, who am I? What am I doing here? How did I get to this condition? I want to go back home. I want to feel safe again. I want to feel secure. I want to feel worthy. I want to do better things. I want to be a better person. What is that better person? The higher we go, the more similar we are. We look past, even if we look different, the appearances are nothing. We are one in the higher stages. There is great community, unity. And we are very happy and very pleased to be that. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hope I tried to, well, I hope that it came across good enough. It's not going to please everybody in every particular way or style in which I presented it, but I hope that the general idea was shared. Those who are truly trying to find light and are more and more getting it and who are looking for real identity will only say that very true conclusion. You too are it. We are all the expression of God, and when we are remembering it better and better and more clear, all the differences, well, we just smile at them and shrug them off and say, well, I understand. And they are there because they need to be, because that's where the individual soul spark is having his or her respective journey. That's where they're at, but they are not stuck there. Now I understand the eternal dance. I am within perfection of Source Self, or I'm having a journey away from it. So everything is understood in its balance, controlled chaos, balance and imbalance, everything within as without. Take care for now. Wish you the best.